January 15th, 2026. While the rest of the world stayed connected 24/7, a nation of 48 million people suddenly went dark. No Facebook, no WhatsApp, no way to share photos, videos, or even make mobile calls. The reason they were holding a presidential election. 2 days later, the United Nations made a statement that shook the international community. This is not a free and fair election. This is systematic repression. And for the first time in recent history, the UN Office of the High Commissioner for Human Rights issued a direct, unambiguous demand. Release Bobi Wine immediately and unconditionally. Who is Bobi Wine? Why did the UN have to intervene so forcefully? And what happened in Uganda during those terrifying days of January 2026 that forced the international community to speak out? To understand this story, we need to go back to a country that has lived under the shadow of one man for nearly 40 years, Yoweri Museveni. That name has been synonymous with Uganda since 1986. When he seized power after a civil war, he was hailed as part of Africa's new generation of leaders, young, dynamic, promising stability and development. Nearly 40 years later, Museveni is still there. He's 81 years old. And the election on January 15th, 2026, marked his 7th run for the presidency. How can one person hold power for that long? The answer lies in constitutional amendments. In 2005, Museveni convinced Parliament to remove the two-term limit. In 2017, when he approached the constitutional age limit of 75, he amended the constitution again to eliminate age restrictions. Here's the most shocking statistic: 70% of Uganda's population is under 35 years old. That means the majority of Ugandans have been born and raised knowing only one president. They've never witnessed a peaceful transfer of power. They don't know what Uganda looks like without Museveni. And it's this young generation that's hungry for change. They see that hope in a young man who transitioned from music to politics and became a symbol of possibility. That man is Robert Kyagulanyi Ssentamu, but the whole nation knows him by his stage name, Bobi Wine. Bobi Wine, 43 years old, isn't your typical politician. He was born and raised in Kamwokya, a poor ghetto on the outskirts of Kampala. His music reflected the hard lives of the poor, social injustice, and dreams of a better Uganda. His fans called him the Ghetto President, a title that carried deep meaning in Uganda. To be from the ghetto wasn't just about poverty. It meant representing the forgotten, the voiceless, the millions living on the margins. Being their president meant giving them hope that one of their own could rise up and fight for them. His songs became anthems for a generation that felt left behind by a government that had been in power since before they were born. In 2017, Bobi Wine entered politics by running for and winning a seat in Parliament. From there, he quickly became the voice of Uganda's youth. In 2021, he ran for president for the first time. Though he lost with 35% compared to Museveni's 58%, he proved himself to be the most serious challenge Museveni had ever faced. And that's precisely why he became the target of a brutal campaign of repression. If you think campaign season is when candidates freely campaign and persuade voters in Uganda during 2025 to 2026, that's a completely different story. On September 3rd, 2024, during a campaign event in Bulindo, Bobi Wine was shot in the leg with a tear gas canister fired at close range by security forces. Images of him falling, blood streaming down his leg, spread across international social media. The Ugandan government later called it an unfortunate accident. But that was just the beginning. From December 2025, when the official campaign period began, Bobi Wine's rallies were continuously disrupted. In Kawempe, police used tear gas to disperse crowds. In Iganga, they used pepper spray, a chemical irritant far more powerful than regular tear gas. Many people were hospitalized for breathing difficulties, skin burns, and eye injuries. Amnesty International documented dozens of similar incidents. In a report published on January 5, 2026, they described this as a brutal campaign of systematic repression targeting the opposition. The organization interviewed victims of torture. One 23-year-old man recounted, "They made me kneel down and asked, 'You still support Bobi Wine?' I said yes. They beat me with sticks and electric batons. They made me kneel on rocks under the scorching sun for 6 hours straight. At least 3 people died in campaign-related incidents before Election Day. Hundreds were arrested, many disappeared for days before their families learned where they were being held. Bobi Wine had to campaign in battle gear, bulletproof vest and helmet. Wherever he went, at least 40 police and military vehicles followed. Not to protect him, but to monitor, intimidate, and stand ready to intervene at any moment. This wasn't a campaign. This was life under constant fear. 2 days before the election, at 6 a.m. on January 13th, 2026, Ugandans woke up to find they couldn't access mobile internet. Facebook didn't work. X, formerly known as Twitter, was blocked. WhatsApp, the most popular messaging app in Africa, was completely paralyzed. Even internet voice calls were cut off. The Ugandan government quickly provided a reason. We have detected conspiracies to use social media to spread misinformation, incite violence, and interfere with the electoral process. Temporarily restricting access is necessary to ensure a free, fair, and safe election. But everyone knew the real reason. In 2021, during the previous election, Uganda had also cut internet access for 5 days. Back then, the world condemned it, but there were no concrete consequences. This time, Museveni and his government knew they could do it again. What does cutting the internet mean in the modern age? It means people can't share images or videos of what's happening at polling stations. Independent journalists can't transmit real-time news. International election observers struggle to communicate and coordinate. And most importantly, the opposition has no way to mobilize supporters, no way to respond quickly to ongoing violations. In the darkness of information, anything can happen without anyone knowing. Bobi Wine posted on X, one of his last posts before social media was completely blocked. They've cut our internet. They want us to vote in darkness. But we will not be silenced. We will fight by every peaceful means. As dawn broke over Kampala's hills on January 15, 2026, more than 21.6 million registered Ugandan voters prepared to head to polling stations. On the streets of the capital, the air felt unnaturally quiet. No honking cars, like every other day. No sounds from the cafes where people usually gathered. Just the heavy footsteps of people leaving home early and the rumble of armored vehicles from security forces patrolling the main roads. In opposition strongholds like Kamwokya, Bobi Wine's hometown, long lines formed as early as 5 a.m. People didn't talk much. They stood silently, occasionally glancing at the police vehicles parked nearby. One woman whispered, "We came early because we're afraid they'll try to stop us from voting." In 2021, they did just that. But from the very first hours, everything descended into chaos. At Nakawa Primary School, a major polling station in eastern Kampala with over 3,000 registered voters, the biometric verification machines refused to start. Election officials hurriedly called to report the malfunction, but they only received vague responses. "We're working on it, please wait." 1 hour passed, 2 hours, 3 hours. Hundreds of people stood waiting in the scorching heat. Some brought water bottles, some elderly people had to sit on the ground from exhaustion. But no one left. They knew that if they left, they might lose their chance to vote. Among those waiting was Sarah, a 22-year-old university student studying journalism. She arrived at 6 a.m., her first time voting in a presidential election. She wore her school's purple t-shirt and carried a notebook, planning to document her first voting experience for a class project. By noon, she was still standing in the same spot. The sun beat down mercilessly. An older woman next to her fainted from the heat. Sarah helped her to the shade, shared her water. By 2 p.m., officials announced the machines still weren't working. By 4 p.m., Sarah had to leave. She had a job interview she couldn't miss. She walked away, tears streaming down her face. "I waited 8 hours, she said to no one in particular. 8 hours to exercise my right, and I couldn't even do that. Behind her, hundreds still waited, hoping against hope they'd get their chance to vote. Finally, around 11 a.m. 4 hours behind schedule, the Electoral Commission made a controversial decision, switched to manual voting. No more machines, just paper pens and fragile trust in the honesty of election officials. For the opposition, this was a nightmare. Manual voting created countless opportunities for fraud ballot stuffing, allowing ineligible people to vote, or simply losing ballots from opposition areas. And without internet, there was no way to document, report, or respond quickly to these violations. Across the country, the same story repeated. Machines broken, voting delayed, suspicions spreading like wildfire, but with no internet to share information, no way to know what was happening elsewhere. NUP representatives tried to document every violation with pen and paper. But at many locations, they were chased away by security forces. The Electoral Commission finally had to extend voting by 1 additional hour. But when the sun set at 6 p.m., thousands still hadn't cast their ballots. They had to return home empty-handed, hearts heavy with disappointment. As the sun set and polling stations closed, vote counting began. According to regulations, counting must be conducted publicly at each polling station with representatives from all parties present. But that night, something terrible happened in the town of Butambala, about 70 kilometers southwest of Kampala. According to Ugandan police reports, around 10 p.m. on January 15th, a group of approximately 200 NUP supporters attacked the local police station, throwing rocks and bottles. Police claimed they had to use tear gas and rubber bullets to disperse the crowd. In the confrontation, 7 people died and over 20 were injured. However, opposition MP Muhoozi Kainerugaba, who has an office in Butambala, told a completely different story. He said about 50 NUP supporters had gathered at his house to monitor election results being announced on radio and TV. They were peacefully assembled, unarmed. But around 9:30 p.m., security forces suddenly surrounded the house and burst in. They didn't say anything, Kainerugaba said. They just started shooting into the crowd. I saw at least 10 people fall. There was blood everywhere. Who's telling the truth? There's no way to know. No videos, no independent photographs, no international journalists present at the scene. James, a 35-year-old freelance journalist, had been trying to document the election despite the internet blackout. He carried his camera and notebook and a portable recorder, old-school tools from before the digital age. On the evening of January 15th, he heard reports of violence in Butambala and rushed there. When he arrived, security forces were still on the scene. He started photographing from a distance. Within minutes, 3 soldiers approached him. "Give us the camera," one demanded. "I'm a registered journalist." James protested, showing his press card. They didn't care. They took his camera, smashed it on the ground, and confiscated his notebook. "There's nothing to see here," they told him. "Go home." James went home that night with empty hands and a full heart of stories he could never tell. This is the danger of cutting internet during elections. Truth gets buried. Violence can happen without independent witnesses, and the government can control entirely what story gets told. Early morning on January 16th, just hours after polling stations closed and preliminary results began to be announced, Bobi Wine posted a brief message on X via VPN, one of the last posts he could send before losing contact completely. "My home is currently surrounded by military and police. No one is allowed in or out. I don't know what they intend to do, but I will not be silenced." The NUP party quickly released more details. Security forces had jumped over the fence and invaded the compound of Bobi Wine's home in Magere on the outskirts of Kampala. They cut the electricity. They blocked all entrances and exits. Family members, including Bobi Wine's wife Barbie Itungo Kyagulanyi, and their children were not allowed to leave the house. A witness living nearby told reporters via landline that they saw a military helicopter land in Bobi Wine's compound around 8 a.m. Then the helicopter took off and flew away. The NUP party declared that Bobi Wine had been kidnapped and taken away on that helicopter. The Ugandan military quickly denied it. Military spokesperson Felix Kulayigye called it baseless rumors aimed at creating public panic. He said Bobi Wine has not been arrested. He is at home. "We are simply providing security for him because he is an important public figure." But the question remained, if this was protection, why was his family also under house arrest? Why were their phones cut? Why weren't lawyers and party representatives allowed in? For the next 24 hours, no one knew where Bobi Wine was or what condition he was in. Human rights activists internationally called this enforced disappearance a serious violation of international human rights law. Then, on the afternoon of January 17th, Bobi Wine suddenly appeared on social media via VPN. He posted a short video filmed on his mobile phone, his face exhausted and voice hoarse. "I have escaped. I can't share details because it would endanger the people who helped me. But I want everyone to know, my wife Barbie. My children and other family members are still under house arrest. They are not allowed to leave. Security forces are still surrounding the compound." He continued, voice resolute. "I do not accept the results of this election. This was a fraudulent election conducted in darkness with violence and threats. Museveni did not win this election. He stole it, and we will not be silent in the face of this injustice." That same day, the Ugandan Electoral Commission announced official results. Yoweri Museveni won with 71.65% of the vote. Bobi Wine came second with 24.72%. 71.65%, an unbelievable number in the context of an election conducted without internet, with widespread technical failures, with violence and opposition repression. A number that almost no one outside Uganda believed. The international community's response came swiftly and with unprecedented force. And leading the charge was the United Nations. Even before the election took place, the UN Office of the High Commissioner for Human Rights had expressed deep concern about the situation in Uganda. In a statement on January 10th, they warned that the election was taking place in an environment marked by widespread repression and intimidation of the opposition, civil society, and independent media. The UN emphasized the Ugandan government is using the law as a tool to restrict democratic space. Laws on public order and national security are being applied arbitrarily to prevent freedom of assembly and freedom of expression. And most importantly, the UN had warned in advance about the risk of internet shutdown. Open access to information and media is key to a free and fair election. Any restrictions on the internet or social media in the electoral context would be a serious violation of the right to freedom of expression and the right to information. On January 13th, when Uganda proceeded to cut mobile internet nationwide, the UN's response was immediate and uncompromising. UN High Commissioner for Human Rights Volker Turk issued a statement. "The internet shutdown in Uganda is a blatant violation of the right to freedom of expression and the right to access information. This is not the first time we've witnessed this, but that doesn't make it any more acceptable. In fact, the repetition of this action shows a systematic contempt for citizens' fundamental rights."